Ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for all being here today, if not in spirit or if not in body, but certainly in spirit and mind. My name is Mike Shield. I'm a reporter with the Planning and Environmental Appeals Division, and I've been appointed by Scottish ministers to consider two applications and to report to them with recommendations. And the applications are firstly by Mr. Jim Reid for the retrospective change of use of agricultural land to form a 10-stance private permanent caravan park with ancillary developments. And secondly by Mr. William Doherty for the change of use, partly retrospective, of agricultural land to form a 9-stance caravan park for touring, gypsy and travelling people, and again with various ancillary facilities. Both of them are on adjoining sites on land to the southwest of Eskview Farm, St Cyrus in Aberdeenshire. As part of my consideration of these applications, I've decided to hold a hearing session to assist me in obtaining further information which I consider I need before I can finalise my reports to the Scottish ministers. I issued a procedure notice as far back, I noticed, as March of this year, indicating the topics that I wanted to discuss at the hearing. We were originally due to hold a hearing in April, which was had to be postponed, and then again it was due to be held last Tuesday on the 27th. But again, this had to be cancelled because of the continuing difficulties we're all facing with COVID-19. The hearing, I should say, will be webcast live at www.dpea.public-i.tv/core/portal/home. That's for everybody who is not directly taking part, and if daytime TV is particularly boring today. The video record of the inquiry will be retained on the website until after the applications are determined. By taking part in the virtual hearing, you're consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of these images and sound recordings and any information contained in them for webcasting and training purposes, and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Before I ask you to introduce yourselves, there are just a number of practical matters, although Callum has largely gone over them already. If I just re-emphasize the fact, when you finish speaking, please remember to turn off your microphones. I'll try and remember to do that myself. And if any parties are not taking an active part in a particular session, as Callum said, you can switch off your video and your mic. You'll still be able to follow the proceedings on the screen, but you'll be able to go and have your coffee and eat a biscuit without the rest of us all feeling incredibly jealous. Right. I'll now ask you to introduce yourselves, and I'll start with those appearing for the applicants. And if I can start with Ms. Farquharson Black.
Hi, good morning. Sorry, you'll see I've moved square because I'm having technical difficulties on my laptop. So I've jumped while that gets fixed. So I appear for the applicants, and I'm here with Ian Walton of SLR Consulting and representing the applicants Bill McDonald and Jim Reid. The intention is that Mr. Walton will do most of the answering the questions because it's very technical, with the applicant stepping in to assist. I'm hoping that I can switch off my video and my microphone. Hopefully I won't go for too many cups of tea, but hopefully I won't have to be that active a participant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just, so that everybody knows, everybody else, Mr. Walton.
Good morning. I'm Ian Walton. I'm a technical director with SLR Consulting. So I'll be dealing with most of the technical issues that are arisen. So, and I'm calling you from Pembrokeshire. So, you're muted, sir.
Sorry. Thank you. Introduce everybody else on the applicant's side, Mr. Reid. Can you hear me, Mr. Reid?
Hi there, yeah, Jim Reid, of one of the residents at the permanent site, North Esk Park. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reid. We'll call on you if I'm sure you'll be able to give us some information in due course. Thank you.
No problem.
And finally, Mr. McDonald, who I see him now, who's now under his own name. Mr. McDonald, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
For the Halton site.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Right, now I'm going to go to SEPA next. So again, Mr. Welton, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your team.
Good morning, sir. My name's Craig Welton. I'm a partner at Burgess Hammond Solicitors representing SEPA at this hearing. I'm joined today on behalf of SEPA by Claire Wheeler, who's a senior hydrologist, Claire Pritchard, who's a senior planning officer, and Jim Mackay, who's the North Air planning manager. I suspect, so this is not a surprise, but we're not quite as far flung as Mr. Walton in terms of Pembrokeshire, but I think we're slightly more spread around the country than the applicants. So what we've taken to try and replicate as close as we can a real life hearing session, we have a parallel line of communication between the team. The intention is that I would be the person to coordinate amongst the team. Like Ms. Farquharson Black, I'm hoping you don't have to hear from me too often, but on occasion I may need to put you on mute and then go to the team just to check who's best placed to answer any questions.
Fine, thank you for that. I should have mentioned, and Callum can, if need be, set up breakout rooms for each of the groups. In which case, so you could, if we have a break, discuss matters between yourselves without everybody else hearing you.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll go through again just individually the members of your team. If I can start with Mr. Mackay.
Good morning, I'm Jim Mackay, and as Craig said, I'm the North Planning Manager.
Thank you. And Ms. Wheeler.
Good morning. Yes, I'm a senior hydrologist from SEPA, and I'm here to talk on any of the technical flood risk issues this morning.
Thank you again. I suspect you'll be taking the brunt of the questions on at least at the first part of the inquiry. And Ms. Pritchard.
Good morning, Claire Pritchard, Senior Planner.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, and last but by no means least, Aberdeenshire Council. If I can start with Mr. McIntosh.
Yes, good
Mr.
morning. Yes, good morning. I'm Rob McIntosh, Principal Solicitor at Aberdeenshire Council. With me is Councillor Wilson and Paul Williamson from the Planning Service. We are here principally to observe, as most of these technical matters are between SEPA consultant to the application and the applicant. But if there's anything particular you would like to address to the council, Mr. Shield would be happy to deal with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Many thanks. Mr. Williamson.
Thank you very much. Yes, as explained by Rob McIntosh, Paul Williamson, Senior Planner in Development Management. I dealt with the planning applications. So again, if there's any specific questions, I'm more than happy to try and answer them. Thank you. And finally, Councillor Wilson.
Good morning. Yes, I cover Ward 19, the Mourns, and as Mr. McIntosh said, I'm here to observe today. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, everybody. And as I say, once again, welcome. I'll now briefly explain the procedures to be followed at the hearing. It's intended to be a relatively informal roundtable discussion chaired by myself and restricted to the matters which I'm seeking further information. Now, I've already circulated the detailed questions to which I'm seeking answers so that parties could be prepared for today. Both SEPA and the Council have, in fact, set out responses to the questions in writing, and I'm grateful to you for doing that, and hopefully this will help to speed up the proceedings. For each question, I will ask one of the parties to respond initially and then seek comments and responses from other parties as appropriate. However, if any other person wants to ask a question in relation to one of these topics, they're welcome to do so. And in a high-tech world we're in, you just raise your hand if you want to ask a question or to say something. All questions should be asked through myself as the chair. As I will be writing down your responses, there will be inevitably some pauses at times, so you'll just have to bear with me when I'm doing that. Some of these questions require only a simple answer or even indeed yes or no, but others will no doubt entail some debate because of the differences in professional opinions that are involved. And I'm conscious that much of the discussion on technical matters will be between the representatives of SEPA and probably Ms. Wheeler and the applicant's professional consultant, Mr. Walton. However, if any of the council representatives wish to ask any questions on any of these matters, then again, I say they're welcome to do so, or indeed if the applicants wish to do so. Although the hearing is relatively narrowly focused on certain technical issues, I should point out at this stage that my report to ministers will be based on all the written submissions and documents that I have received from the parties, including the representations submitted by members of the public. Whilst I've set aside the whole day for the hearing, I'm hopeful that we will be able to finish in a much shorter time. I am, however, conscious that looking at a screen and concentrating on a screen for long periods can be tiring, and that breaks may be called for, including for lunch if we go on that long, depending on the progress we were making. I would suggest that sessions should not last for any longer than 2 hours, and that we would proceed on that basis. And as I've said, Callum can set up breakout groups for each of the three main parties if you then want to chat amongst yourselves when we're having a break. Right, I think that's all that I need to say at this stage, but are there any questions that anybody wants to raise on procedural matters before we get into the main agenda? I'll take that as a no then. That's good, thank you. Right, well, I think it's a question of eyes down, fingers on the buzzer. And the first question certainly is an easy starter for 10. And it really was just a matter of seeking clarification because there appeared to me anyway, and it might be my take that there was some discrepancy in what had been said in the flood risk and drainage appraisal as the distance from the site of the Logie Mill gauging station. Now, SEPA in its responses indicated what it believes the correct position is. And perhaps I would just ask Mr. Walton, because it was your documents which I was having a little difficulty with, do you agree with what SEPA has said?
I do, sir. Good start.
So we're agreed that it's roughly 4 kilometers from the site, or a bit.
Yes, sir. I mean, if it will be of assistance, I have prepared a plan that shows the relative locations I can send you after the hearing, but it's up to you, sir. That
would be helpful. Thank you very much. And
okay,
if you can copy it, well, yeah, Miss Fox and Black will deal with the things. Yes, I've no doubt. Yes, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Right, we get into some of the more difficult issues now, and these deal with the question of whether the let me just go to the general logarithmic distribution or the general equivalent value distribution should be used. Now, first thing just to clarify in my mind, my understanding of the purpose of these exercises, whatever method is being used, is essentially to establish mathematically or statistically a best fit curve for the available data plot, so that it's possible to then extrapolate values for peak flows where the data is not available. Am I correct in that assumption, Mr. Walton?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Wheeler, is my understanding correct?
Yes, that's right. You're trying to assign a rarity to a flood of a particular size.
Thank you very much. Well, I was going to ask, as I say, I will ask SEPA first to go first, and then SLR to give its view, and then we'll have some discussion as necessary on these matters. And I appreciate that you, both SLR and SEPA, have stated their position on a number of previous occasions, and that your views are based on your own particular professional judgments and opinions. All I'm trying to do at this stage is to try to pull together these views and help me understand the reasons for these differences. So I will start with SEPA, if I may. Now, you very helpfully set out in writing your response, and I don't want you to read through that, but Ms. Wheeler, are there any particular points that you want to highlight at this stage?
I think the main point to highlight is the difference between the two distributions, and it's set out, the reason that's set out in the flood estimation handbook of why the generalised logistic distribution is preferred is because it doesn't, the behaviour of that distribution doesn't apply this cap that the generalised extreme value does. So the GEV distribution is more likely to place an upper limit on what the flow estimates are likely to be, and that can cause estimates of much rarer events to be not very much bigger than some floods that we've already seen. Whereas the GL doesn't usually provide this limitation, and so that's why it's considered the default distribution to use for UK catchments. I think on this particular case, we don't see a clear difference in how the GEV fits the data compared to the GL. So the justification was given was that when you look at the site data from the Logie Mill gauging station, that there's a clear benefit in how the GEV fits the data. We don't really see that as being the case. The two distributions are very similar until you get to around about the 1 in 50 year flood, and then after that they deviate. Beyond that, we don't have any floods that are of that size that can confirm one way or the other which is the most likely to be true. And so given that there isn't a physical reason in this catchment, like the presence of a very large loch, that would make the GEV, that would be a very good justification for using the GEV. You know, we can't see a really strong justification for using the GEV instead of the GL, because it gives a lower estimate. Then there's, you know, the consequences of making that underestimation of flows needs to be considered.
Thank you very much. Mr. Walton, then if I can turn to you, and you'll be able to explain your position, and no doubt will, say, respond to some of the points that have been made by SEPA, and we'll have some discussion, or we can go back in due course. Mr. Walton.
Thank you. Can I start by thanking SEPA for preparing their detailed response to the questions and showing them in advance of today's hearing. It's enabled me to prepare a response to the points they've made, and I hope we're aid progress as we go along. In responding really to question 1.2, I'm also really responding to question 1.3, which is what I consider my justification is better. So if you'll bear with me, I'll be, I suppose, responding to SEPA's points and also making my own at the same time, although there is some additional information I'll provide in response to 1.3. So could I please ask that you have the hydrology report in front of you, which is rather confusingly at Appendix HMR3 of the hydraulic modelling report, which is at Appendix 1 of the flood risk and drainage appraisal. But hopefully you've thought out how to navigate my rather obscure documentation.
Yes, thank you. I must confess that when I first saw this, it took me a little time to work my way through all the different appendices, but I succeeded eventually.
Can you imagine how long it took us to write it? Okay, and what I basically do is I'll go through SEPA's response paragraph by paragraph, if that's okay with you. I'd like, if possible, to go through all their paragraphs, and then perhaps SEPA can just respond if they want to at the end of my response to the question. Is that fair?
That's fine. Yeah. I say you'll have to bear with me. I'm going to write these down, so it'll take me a little time to, no doubt.
I've been told to try and speak slowly.
Just think of me as the 3-year-old.
Okay. in terms of the first paragraph, I agree that the flood estimation handbook does make a broad recommendation that the GL distribution is used for UK analysis. However, it does not suggest that it is necessarily appropriate in all cases. I could ask you to look at page 8 of the hydrology report. I make reference to the Environment Agency's flood estimation guidelines, which state, it's a footnote there.
Yeah.
Those guidelines basically state, and this is just reiterating what the flood estimation handbook say, on average, the GL distribution is considered to perform better than the GEV distribution for pooled growth curve derivation. For some pooling groups, other distributions are found to fit better than the GL. And then importantly, you should usually select the distribution that gives the best fit. So in responding to the second paragraph, SEPA correctly points out that the GEV distribution can be bounded above. This is where it's tending to a cap. However, this is not the case in our analysis, and I'll try and explain to you why, sir. I am going to have to make a few references to the flood estimation handbook, and I doubt very much whether you've got a copy of that to hand, sir.
No, I certainly haven't.
However, I can provide copies of the extracts that I'm going to refer to after the hearing, if that be of assistance.
Bear with me a minute. Yeah, going back to that question of whether copies of the flood estimation handbook. To be honest with you, I don't think it's necessary. Okay. Otherwise, we'll probably get into we'll need to have then further discussions between you and SEPA on how you interpreted the flood estimation handbook. And I think I'm happy to take your references at face value. No doubt Miss Wheeler will be familiar with the document and will be able to point me to anything that she thinks doesn't support your case.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's not. Yeah, we'll take it as read then.
Yeah.
So, if just for SEPA's benefit, then it's section 15.4.6, the flood estimation handbook, compares the merit.
Can you give me that reference again? Just...
Yeah, sorry, 15.4.6.
Okay.
Compares the merit G and GL distributions, and specifically refers to GEV being bounded above. And where this occurs, estimated flood flows tend to be only slightly higher than the maximum of observed flow in the data set, which is what Ms. Wheeler has just said. However, it goes on to say that GEV distributions are only bounded above where the L skewedness, which is a statistical parameter of the distribution, is less than a value of 0.17.
What was that? L, sorry?
L skewedness, SKEW-NESS. I'm afraid it's going to be a slight lesson of statistics, but never mind.
Yeah. No, it's all right. Then skewedness was less than
0.17. If I can ask you to turn to Appendix HR5, which is the appendix to the hydrology report.
Yeah.
And you'll see there's a page titled Pooling Group Analysis Target Catchment.
Yeah.
If you look at the header of the columns on the table at the top of the page, it gives you an L skew value for all of the stations that form the pooling group.
Yeah, got that.
And if you look at all those values, sir, you'll see that all of them apart from one is a value above 0.17. And you'll also see that the weighted mean of the L skew values is 0.241.
Yeah.
So what this means there is that effectively that the GEV distribution in this instance is not bounded above. It doesn't tend to a maximum. And you can now look at figure 3.2 on page 9 of the hydrology report.
Figure 3.2, yes, got it.
Okay, this is basically showing the distribution curve, the best fit curves to the data. And there are three curves. I know it's not particularly clear, sir, but the curve at the top is the GL distribution. The second curve down is the GEV distribution, and the third one is a distribution we haven't used. If the GEV distribution was bounded above, you would expect to see the GEV distribution, instead of a general upward trajectory, you would tend to see it tending to flatten off, as you might do an exponential decay curve.
I understand, yeah.
So you can see that that curve's continuing to rise, which again, it just confirms what I've said from a statistical point of view, looking at the L-skewedness, that the distribution in this case is not bounded above. If you could now turn to table 3.2 of the hydrology report, which is on page 11. You bear in mind, sorry.
Yeah, table 3.2, yeah.
Okay, if you bear in mind that the maximum observed flow on the 30th of December 2015 was about 707 cubic meters per second, which is the maximum value that we've used to define the data distribution. And if you now look at the values that we've estimated using this distribution, you'll see that for the, excuse me, sir, the 0.1, the 1 in 1,000 year event, the value we have there is 1,220 cubic meters per second. So that's effectively almost twice. Our estimate of the 1 in 1,000 year flood flow is approximately twice the maximum value in the observed record. Now, from what Deepa said just now, and guidance says that if the distribution was bounded above, the distribution tends to a maximum slightly above the maximum observed value. But we're not in that situation. So from a statistical point of view and from the evidence point of view, the distribution, the GEV distribution in these circumstances is not bounded above. So I would say that Deepa's concerns about that aspect of our use of the GEV distribution is unwarranted or unfounded.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. I'll mark you on your essay later, sir.
Right, that's the point you're making at the moment, is that right?
Yes. Can we go to the third paragraph now?
Yes, yeah, gosh, yes. We're only two terminals.
Yes, I'm afraid it's quite a long journey, this.
Yeah, no problem.
At this paragraph, people actually concede that the GEV has a slightly better goodness of fit to the data than the GL distribution. The goodness of fit there is just basically a statistical test of how closely the data fits to a particular distribution curve. And so, going back to what I said previously about the guidance, you should generally, or you should use the distribution that best fits the curve. So having removed the concern that the GEV may be bounded above, you then have to look at which data set best fits the data. And I would contend that the GEV, I admit it is marginal, but I would contend that the GEV is a better set of data. And as my professor used to say at college, that you should let the data speak for themselves. And it's also of note there that until the advent of the flood estimation handbook in 1999, previously we used to use the flood estimation handbook written in the 1970s, and that actually used the GE distribution for the regional growth curves. Excuse me. So it has a long tradition and a long history of being considered acceptable for frequency distribution in the UK. Now, some refer to certain features in their response to question 1.4 that we'll get to. They talk about very large attenuation effects, which dampen the catchment runoff due to potentially large lockup streams. So what they're trying to say is where the GEV distribution can be appropriate hydrologically is when you've got a large reservoir or lockup stream of your site, which tends to attenuate and dampen flow. So it's really that the GEV is a good way of mimicking the attenuating effect of large locks upstream of the site. So that's when a GEV distribution might be appropriate if it were bounded. Now, as I say, we're not bounded in this or bounded above in this situation, and there aren't any locks. But as I said before, the GE distribution is appropriate because it's not constrained. So I would just conclude by saying that this is an entirely appropriate distribution to use in these circumstances. And I will go on to discuss in response to your question 1.3 about the other analysis we did that to support our estimate. On to the fourth paragraph there, when you're ready.
Just give me a minute, please. Okay, yeah.
SEPA has, in effect, put forward some new evidence in terms of they've made reference to a couple of additional flood events. Now, I'm happy to deal with that if you will allow it. So,
yeah.
Okay. So can I ask you to turn to page 10 of the hydraulic modelling report, please?
That's the hydraulic modelling
Yes.
report. Yeah, that's
page 10. Before we start. We have calibrated our model against
Hang on,
December
can you just bear
20.
with, if you just bear with me a minute, please.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm just getting to the document. Yeah, got it.
Okay. We calibrated our hydraulic model against the December 2012 and the 30th December 2015 flood event. And in my opinion, this does not appear to be disputed by SEPA. The model calibrated very well against both observed flood events. However, SEPA state in their response at paragraph 4 that event 6 times gauge record, which is better than the 23rd of December event, but then they only specify 5 dates. But I'm assuming that the 6th event is the flood event itself, the 23rd December 2012. So what SEPA are basically saying is, statistically, based on our analysis, we would expect to have only seen 3 flood events exceeding the magnitude of the 2012 event, and in fact they're saying there are 6 events in the record, which tends to undermine our analysis that the GEV distribution is appropriate. However, and this is where it might get a bit nebulous, but the 6 events they list, 3 of them are mentioned in our flood risk and drainage appraisal, the 23rd of December and the 30th of December as calibration events. And then we also note the 14th of November event as a notable event as well. So those are the 3 events that I've referred to, and then SEPA have added an extra 3. To basically get a bit of context around the additional 3 events that SEPA have raised, I've actually looked at the gauge record that SEPA has previously provided us. Now this is basically a 15-minute, every 15 minutes over the last 38 years, the flow recorded at the gauging station. So as you can imagine, so it's a very large spreadsheet, and I wasn't really planning to share it with you, but it's available if you like.
No, thank you.
You can basically see where our track and trace system went wrong when you run out of spreadsheets. So, what we basically have is that the record confirms that on the 2nd of December 2002, 22nd of November 2002, 12th of October 2012, the flow did indeed exceed the flow recorded on the 23rd of December 2012. However, it's important to note that the annual maxima series that's used for flood frequency estimation is based on the largest flood that occurred in each water year, which runs nominally from 1st of October to 30th of September. So you can have multiple significant flood events in a given year, but it's only the largest event within that year that is used for flood estimation purposes or flood frequency estimation, hence the reference to the annual maxima series. What SEPA have done is effectively to quote 6 flood events. So when we're seeking to compare the number of floods that have occurred over a period of SEPA have done for statistical purposes, to ensure that you're comparing like with like, you have to look at the number of water years where the maximum flood in that year was large in a specific flood event, not the number of floods over the period under consideration. So, and this is the important bit, sir.
Yeah.
Two of the floods quoted by SEPA were in water year 2002, and 2 were in 2012. So it follows that the actual number of annual maxima that occurred over the period that SEPA were talking about is 4 rather than 6, because 2 of those events occurred in the same water year. So when considering from a statistical point of view, they were in the same water year, so they effectively count as 1 maximum. So effectively, my reanalysis of what SEPA are saying is, in fact, there were 4 water years in the period of the record where SEPA say they would expect 3 events to have occurred. So rather than SEPA saying our analysis is flawed because a flood of the magnitude of December 2012 occurred 6 times where you'd expect it to have occurred 3, I say it occurred 4 times where you'd expect it to occur 3 times. And I would say that given the variability of the climate, the fact that we had 4 rather than 3 events does not undermine our estimation of the use of the GEV distribution.
Yeah.
So have you got that point, sir, do you think?
Oh, I certainly have. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good. Okay. If we could move on to the 5th paragraph. So SEPA has basically provided no analysis to support their statement, but I'm content to accept their figure. I'd just like to add that the Flood Estimation Handbook report at section 17.3.2 that considers the goodness of fit measure of 600.
Sorry, sir, I missed that reference. Apologies.
Sorry. Flood estimation handbook at 17.3.2.
Thank you.
Just considering the goodness of fit measure to nearly 700 UK sites, the GEV was considered acceptable for 66% of sites and was the best distribution in 19% of these cases. So whilst the GL distribution provides the best overall fit to the UK data, where it was the best distribution in 63% of cases and acceptance 74% of cases, there are instances where the GEV performs better, and I would contend that this is one of them. So the statement in the flood estimation handbook that the GL distribution is found to give the best fit to UK flood data is therefore simply commentary on the results of the analysis and should not be taken to mean that in all cases it provides the best fit, because this is simply not the case. In summary, I'd say that SEPA has highlighted the general caution outlined in the guidance should be applied to the use of the GEV distribution. However, when considering the specifics of the site, these concerns should not apply. There's nothing in the guidance that says the GEV distribution should not be applied, and indeed guidance says it should be applied when it's the best for the data, as it is in this case. And I would just reiterate the Environment Agency's own guidance: you should select the distribution that gives the best fit. And you'll be happy to know, so I will conclude at that point.
Thank you, Mr. Walton. That was very helpful. Well, Ms. Wheeler, there's a lot to absorb. Are you in a position to be able to respond to some of these points?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Okay, I've made notes in the order that we discussed them, so I'll proceed in that order. So yes, we'd agree that the GL distribution is not appropriate in all cases. There are, of course, cases where it is appropriate, and Mr. Walton outlined the scenarios where there's a large loch upstream. We'd entirely agree with that. That isn't the case, of course, in this catchment. There is no physical feature why we think it would be better. I take the point on the GEV doesn't think is unbounded in this case. We saw in that graph that we were referred to that the GEV is flatter than the GL, but it doesn't totally flatten off. So we can see that it might not be bounded. The point that the 1 in 1,000 year flow is nearly twice that of the largest flood that has happened. I mean, for a lot of the advice that's been given on the back of the flood risk assessment, it's the 1 in 200 year flow that's been referred to, although it is, of course, our position that the 1 in 1,000 year should be used given the vulnerability of the development that's proposed. But much of the advice is given based on the 1 in 200 year flow. Now, the 1 in 200 year flow is 24% larger than the 2015 flood that happened. One of the things that they did in the flood risk assessment was look at how much bigger the 2015 flood was on the neighbouring D catchment compared to its next largest flood, and there was, I think Mr. Walton might come on to it in future questions, but there was discussion about whether the 2015 flood should be considered closer to a 200-year flood rather than the 50-year flood that we think it is in this catchment. But in the case on those D sites, in 2015, the flow was off on many of the stations was more than twice the flow of the next nearest flood event. So in this catchment, the 2015 flow was only 24% more than the next biggest flood, and then the 1 in 200 year flow that's been estimated is 19% more than that again. So compared to the River D stations, where we're looking at a 1 in 200 year flood which has occurred, which is 60 to 100% bigger than the next biggest flood, you know, the margins are quite small, relatively.
So can I just hold you there just so that I can just catch up on some of these bits? can I again just I'm going to ask you to go back a little bit just over some of those points, because I'm not entirely sure that I've got it all correctly. What you're saying is that the 1 in 200 year flood for flow for the North Esk is 24% greater than the 2015 flood that occurred. Is that right?
I think it's 19% more.
19% more than the.
Yeah.
Right, not like that. Whereas if you compare that to the River Dee,
which Mr. Walton did in the flood risk assessment.
Yeah, then the 1 in 200 year flood, are you saying was 60 to 100%?
Yeah, so there were some stations on the River Dee where we believed that the 2015 flood was in the order of a 200-year flood, but at those sites the flow was 60 to 100% more than it had been at the next biggest flood. So it doesn't follow that at this particular site the 2015 flood was of a 200-year scale, and it also doesn't follow that the estimating a flood which is 19% larger than the next biggest flood that has happened is you know, a large margin above what's happened compared to the margin of difference we've seen in other catchments.
So you think that on the River Dee, there were stations where the 2015 flood was in fact equivalent to the 1 in 200 year flood?
Yes, I do. Yeah, but not entirely, not across the whole of the Dee catchment, but on parts of the Dee catchment. This is part of a point of how flooding is not uniform across catchments. So what happens in a neighbouring catchment doesn't suggest that what's happened on this catchment would be the same. There was also a point there that Mr. Walton's referring to the 1 in 1,000-year flow as being much larger than the next biggest flood that's happened, but then a lot of the advice that's given in the flood risk assessment is based on the 1 in 200-year scenario and not the 1 in 1,000-year scenario. So in terms of depths and velocities for evacuation, we do indeed think that the 1 in 1,000-year would be the more appropriate to use.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the Mr. Walton referred to the data having to speak for itself. We would say that the evidence should speak for itself. So all of the evidence and not just one view of the data. The flood estimation handbook is very clear that it's not a prescriptive approach, and it's not a cookbook. I think it actually uses those words. It isn't it does need user interpretation and experience in using it. There's always uncertainty with estimating flood flows of events that only happen very rarely, and so you do need to take a careful approach and look at what's actually happened. Mr. Walton referred to the previous the predecessor to the flood estimation handbook. That is in fact called the flood studies report, not the flood estimation handbook. So the flood studies report was in place from 1975 until 1999, and it did use the GEV as the default distribution, but there was a clear and intentional departure when they published the flood estimation handbook in 1999, that they were recommending the GL as the default distribution. And to take a later point now, because Mr. Walton went back to an earlier point about the GEV being better than the GL. He said there's nothing to say that the GEV should not be applied, but the GL is the default distribution to use. So the onus is very much on the demonstration that the GEV should be used, as opposed to there not being any reason for it not to be used. this is the problem with any flow estimation. There is an, there's an amount of uncertainty, and we have to apply a judgment. I think on the point about the 6 floods, those flood peaks were all independent floods. So a flood of that, it is a fact that a flood of that size has happened 6 times in the past 36 years. So Mr. Walton is right that floods of that size have only happened in 4 water years, but they have happened 6 times. So we have to think about the context in which this information is being used. It's being used in order to make a decision on how much risk we think there is at the site. And so it doesn't make sense to give the impression at the site that this flood would only happen 4 times in 36 years, when in fact it has happened 6 times in 36 years. It's not, it underplays the frequency with which a flood of that size would happen. And I think it's very important for this site, especially if people are going to continue to live there, that they have a really realistic understanding of how often flooding can be expected to happen. And I think focusing on the statistical methods is it distracts us from what is actually happening on the ground.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Is that all you wanted to say at this stage?
I think that's all I have at this stage, yes.
Thank you, that was very helpful indeed. Mr. Walton, do you want to come back on that?
Unsurprisingly, I would. I'm first pleased to acknowledge that SEPA acknowledged that the GV distribution at this location is not bounded above. I think they slightly misinterpreted what I said about the presence of reservoirs. The only reason there are no reservoirs there, and I accept that, and the fact that there aren't any, and because the distribution is not bounded above, means that it is an appropriate distribution. So I hope that point is clear. Seeing reference to the fact that I've used the 0.1% AEP event to look at the statistical analysis at this point rather than 0.5. The point I was making when I made reference to the 0.1% was, and I accept that we've used the 0.5% for most of the analysis we've done, but we've also looked at 1.1%, was simply to point out that if the distribution was bounded above, the 0.1% is a much bigger flow than the 0.5%. So you'd expect that to be, what I'm saying is there is a significant multiple between the figures observed flow and the 0.1%. The biggest one we've estimated that clearly demonstrates it isn't bounded. I think the point that SEPA made about, first of all, in terms of the reference to the river D catchment, we're not suggesting that I've never suggested that the flow in the River North Esk in December 2015 was a 1 in 200 year event. We estimated it was a 1 in 67 year event, and SEPA estimated it was a 1 in 50 year event. But I am slightly surprised that SEPA are now telling us that we shouldn't be slavishly sticking to what the flood estimate, what the statistical analysis said, because we've consistently, and I'll point you because I'm going to go on to this point in my response at 1.3, we've consistently pointed to other evidence as to why we think that our distribution should be preferred over SEPA, by exactly looking at other flood events to sort of effectively calibrate and set the flood in context. I have not suggested that there wouldn't be a number of different flood events. The point that SEPA was making in the number of flood events that they quoted was used in a way to effectively try and undermine or discredit the GEV distribution that we've mentioned. So I fully accept that those floods occurred, and I'm not trying to get away from that. What I'm simply saying is that if SEPA are using that flood sequence to comment on the GEV distribution that we've used, from a statistical point of view, they were not applying the data consistently. I'm not suggesting that the floods aren't there, didn't occur, and I'm not suggesting they weren't significant floods. I'm just making the point that people were trying to use that flood sequence to effectively question the validity of the GEV distribution, and they've incorrectly, in my view, interpreted that flood event for that purpose. So I hope that's clear. And I will go on to talk about, I think, the other methods we've looked at in question 1.3. So hopefully you have got my points in response to the points that SEPA made.
Okay, well, I'm sure that there's some things that Ms. Wheeler might want to come back on. I wonder whether at this stage there, because you've referred to question 1.3, if you make your points or the statement points that you want to make about in relation to that question, and then Ms. Wheeler, I'll give you the chance to come back on that and anything that Mr. Walton has just raised. Is that okay with you? Thank you. Right. So we're going on to question 1.3, which was in relation to whether the GL distribution generally gives predictions of greater annual maximum flows for higher return periods, and if so, what the reason for this is. So yeah, Mr. Walton, if you'd like to.
You'll be glad I'm going to be relatively brief about this, sir, because I've commented on this before in other correspondence that you will have seen. So I just want to refer to that. So
yeah, if you want to draw my attention, because there's a lot of correspondence between you and SEPA, so you can, yeah, that's great.
Okay, so as I've just said, rather than relying on statistical analysis, I've sought to assess the soundness of our assessment by reviewing the impact of Storm Frank, which gave rise to the largest flood on record on 30th December 2015. If I could ask you to, we've sort of been there already, so I don't think I need to take you there again, sir, but as we set out in the previously, SEPA have estimated the 2015 flood event to be a 1 in 50 year event, and we suggest it was about 1 in 67, or 2% and 1.5%. The difference between our estimated return periods of the two events is largely attributable to the choice of the GEV distribution over the GL distribution. As I say, if you look at section 8 of our hydrology report, we set out quite a detailed assessment of Storm Frank. And
sorry, but I'm just going to, again, what page 8 of the hydrology report?
It's page 22, section 8.
Ah. Yep, got you.
I don't particularly want to go through all of that in any great detail, so particularly as if you look at it was my letter of the 9th of December 2019, which was a response to the first request for information, and particularly in matter 8, in response to matter 8.
So again, I didn't catch the date of your letter.
It was the 3rd of December 2019, which was my letter to Alan Seath, which I think was then submitted to you, sir, in response to the first notice.
Yeah.
Okay. If I can draw you to matter 8, sir, which is on page 8 of that letter.
Bear with me a minute, I shall find it. Matter 8, did you say?
Matter 8, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And towards the bottom of that page, I set out a number of bullet points.
Yeah.
I know people will dispute this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
You're entitled to?
Yes, of course. If you look at the hydraulic modelling report drawings, we have reproduced SEPA's flood map, and I checked it last night and it's still valid. SEPA's flood map that's published on their website is reproduced as our drawing HMR02.
Yeah.
And for the medium flood event, which is equivalent to the 1 in 200 0.5%, our flood envelope is actually considerably less than the one that they derive. Now, I know they will say that it has not been subject to detailed flood modelling to the same extent that ours have, but nevertheless, at some point, someone has estimated a flood flow and routed it through a degree of a model, and it's their analysis. And when all said and done, that's used by the planning authorities for guiding development in the first instance. Their flood envelope is larger than ours, but I won't rely entirely on that because I'm sure SEPA are going to respond to that point. We've then looked at all the evidence of Storm Frank in terms, including the impact on the adjacent G catchment. And as SEPA point out, and as we've acknowledged, that flood event was about a 1 in 200 year event. Now, Storm Frank was not a local isolated summer storm that just fell on one part of the catchment. It tracked across a large part of northeast England across to Scotland, and it was one of the most notable floods in the UK for quite some time. It was a large frontal system. So, as I said previously, we're not suggesting that the estimate of the flood return period in our catchment in the River Northwest was 200, but it certainly was a notable event. And I think one of the other issues as well, and we've looked at the antecedent conditions that drive the flood.